Hello, everyone. It's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. I'm recording this on the evening of April 3rd, 2025. So today the stock market took but basically a 5% hit. This is the S&P 500, took about a 5% hit, and the same happened to the Dow and the Nasdaq, and across all of U.S. markets and across markets across the world, actually. This is the response to the tariffs that were announced by the United States on the evening of the 2nd. And this represents a loss of about $2.5 trillion in one day from the US stock market. And this represents the largest loss since 2020. And so this is the list of the tariffs that were released by the White House. And it says reciprocal tariffs. So that means like we're getting them back for the tariffs that they're charging us. So it makes it seem like these people are charging us a bunch of tariffs, so we need to kind of even the table. What it says here, tariff charged to the USA, and in smaller print it says including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So I was like wondering, how did they come up with this? Are these like, they are saying that China has a 67% tariff on us if you include those things, and the EU has a 39%, and Vietnam has a 90%, and Korea has a 50%. And the ones that we're most interested in for Aptera is the European Union, because Italy is part of the European Union, and a lot of parts are going to be from Italy, the bank and the chassis from Co-Stamp. And so a lot of the parts are from Europe, and then the batteries and stuff are from South Korea. So they have, according to this, they have a 50% tariff. These numbers looked wildly wrong to me, because if you look at the actual tariffs that we see, you can look at, this is from World Population Review. They talk about, now this is not the tariffs that these countries charge to the United States. It's the tariffs that they charge kind of on average to everyone. So it includes the United States. So these aren't like 100% accurate numbers just for the United States, because maybe there's different tariffs that they're charging to the US versus other countries. But you can see none of them are even remotely close to the numbers that are shown on this thing. This is not remotely close. So let's look at these. The countries that have the highest tariff rates are very, very small countries with small economies, and I believe that they're using tariffs as a major source of their funding for their government, and that's how they're doing it, rather than using like income tax or sales tax or corporate tax, that kind of thing, because they don't really have that many ways of collecting tax. And tariffs are kind of the easiest way for governments to collect taxes, because the government can easily control the flow of goods from their ports and then levy tariffs at the port of entry. Whereas if you run like a cash-based economy, and people are paid cash and they do a lot of their interactions in cash, which is the case in a lot of countries, then it's very hard for the government to capture that. They don't know who's buying from what, who's getting paid what, because it's all done in cash. So it's very hard to get an income tax or a sales tax or anything like that to work. So these smaller countries, I think they use these tariffs as a major way to fund their own government. So you see, like, these are very small countries: Bermuda, Belize, Bahamas, Chad, Central African Republic, Gabon, Sierra Leone, Venezuela. Nigeria is actually a pretty big country, and they have a pretty high tariff rate. But as you can see, most of these are not countries that are economic powerhouses, and most of the countries that have good economies and have large economies, they don't have high tariff rates. Now Brazil has a pretty big economy; they have a pretty high tariff rate at 8%. Let's look at, as you go down, you see Korea's at 5%. Now we're getting into like countries that have like basically more developed economies and more developed ways of taxation. So you can see Russia at 2%. We're going to see Israel 3%. China's at 2.3%. Japan's at 1.8%. United States has, up until now, had an average weighted tariff rate to the world at 1.5%. So very, very low. And most of the EU is very low, 1.4%, that kind of stuff. So anyways, these Vietnam 1.2%, which is, Obviously very different than this 90% tariff rate that Vietnam has supposedly. So I was wondering, how the heck did they come up with this? And if you go to the office of the US Trade Representative, they tell you how they calculated it. This was released today, and the way they calculated it is reciprocal tariff calculations. How did they get these reciprocal tariffs? They said while individually computing trade deficits of thousands of tariffs, regulatory, tax, and other policies is complex, if not impossible. So that's what I thought. I'm like, there's no way you can calculate what the regulatory burden and their current, quote, currency manipulation, all that other stuff. Like, how do you even calculate that? Like, there's no real way of doing that. That's a very, very complex model, and it would take a long time to figure that out. And so they said, if not impossible, their combined effects can be proxied by computing the tariff level consistent with driving bilateral trade deficit to zero. So they're saying they found another way of saying, like, if we do this other calculation, we can say that that's basically a proxy or a good estimate of all this other stuff. So what is their thing? This is the formula they're using. Now, this looks complicated, but it's extremely simple. What they're saying is X sub I. So they say X sub I is total exports. See, let X sub I represent total exports. And then M sub I represent total imports. So exports, imports. And then epsilon is elasticity of imports, and phi is pass-through tariffs to import prices. This thing you don't have to worry about because they tell you what the values are. They're saying they're going to set epsilon at 4, and they're going to set psi at 0.25. If you multiply 4 by 0.25, that equals 1. So this part right here is 1. So that you can just take that out of the equation. So then the whole equation becomes total exports minus total imports divided by total imports. And that's exactly what they did. If you go look at their, the Federal Trade Commission and look through any country, you just take their trade deficit, so exports minus imports, so that's 295, because we exported 143 billion to China and we imported 438 billion from China. So our trade deficit is, basically 300 billion. If you divide this, so this is exports minus imports, and divide it by imports, you get 67%. And if you look at this, that is exactly what they're saying China. And then people have gone through every single country, and that's exactly how they come up with these numbers. So the numbers have nothing to do with currency manipulation, trade barriers, that kind of stuff. It's just saying, what's our trade deficit with this country? Divide it by the total amount of imports from that country, and we're going to say that that's the tariffs that they're levying on us. It's not really the tariffs that they're levying on us, but we're going to levy actual tariffs on everyone. And if we have a trade positive with them, if we're net positive with them, we're just giving them 10%. So basically, everyone with 10%. We trade. We don't have a trade deficit with them. We have a trade. I can't think of the word right now. But anyway, we're trade positive. We export more than we import from them. So like Australia, we're just gonna give everyone a 10% tariff across the board. So remember, our tariff was 1.5% before. So what does this mean? Aptera is gonna get parts from mainly the EU, mainly Italy, South Korea. And then a little bit from China. China already has a 20% tariff on them across the board. And then this is additional tariffs, 34%. And I love how this is said. USA discounted reciprocal tariffs. It looks like we're charging them half the amount they're charging us, which is like how magnanimous we are. But this is a completely bogus calculation. And they put it in this thing and they try to make it sound very obscure, like this looks like a complicated formula because they put like Greek letters in there. It's like elementary school math. It's like subtraction and then divide once. It's very, very simple, and the whole thing is like the most simplistic model you could ever think of. It's just trade deficit minus imports. Kind of crazy, but anyways, this represents the highest amount of of tariffs that we've had in over 100 years. The last time we had tariffs nearly this high was in the 1930s, where there's an act called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. If you've taken an economics class, you've heard of this. And I'm going to show you a few videos at the end, which I think state what I'm thinking much better than I. And they're going to kind of mention this. But going back, let's talk about how this affects Aptera. So we get parts from European Union, China, South Korea. This means that the parts from South Korea are going to be 25% more expensive. And the way this works is like LG and CT&S do not pay this 25%. Okay, it's not the foreign companies that are paying this. What happens is they ship the thing to Aptera. So let's say they ship the battery packs or the battery cells. LG Chem sends, battery cell, like $1 million of battery cells to Aptera. Before Aptera can take it off the docks, Aptera must pay the US federal government $250,000, so 25% of those battery cells. Same thing with the banks and the chassis and everything. So with that, that's going to be 20%. And then China, the number of parts from China is going to be very, very small. So I think it's like a few $100s per vehicle, but that's going to be a 50%. So if it was $500 per vehicle, it's going to be $750 now instead of $500. And so Aptera pays for that. Aptera, the companies, pays for that. And so like if you're importing like wine or something from France, the French wine producers don't pay the tariff. The importer, the guy who's importing the wine, he pays the tariff at the port of entry. So that's how it works. And then, of course, their costs go up. And in order to stay in business, they're going to have to pass along the costs to the consumer. So Aptera is going to have to pass along these costs. It's not good for them. Now, the flip side is this is not good for any car company. Our world economy is so globalized. No one like Ford and GM and all these car companies, they get parts from all over the world. They get parts from Europe. They get parts from Korea. They get parts from China. They get parts from Japan. Oh yeah, I guess there's a couple of parts from Japan, like Yazaki is doing the wiring harness. But that should be a low budget item. 24% on that. Anyways, it's going to affect everyone. Everyone's price is going to go up. Now, the idea behind tariffs, tariffs aren't a crazy thing. I mean, they're a useful policy tool. There's several reasons that you want to have tariffs once in a while, and there's good reasons to have it. Like one is if the country is dumping products into your like they're dumping products to try to put your local industry out of business. And then once they go out of business, then they can jack up the prices. Then you want to protect your domestic business from going out of business from this dumping. So you would send tariffs. Or let's say that like a company, some industry is heavily subsidized by the other country's government. Then their product is much cheaper because they're getting a subsidy from their government. And then we can't compete because our company's not getting that same subsidy. So therefore, you could put a tariff on them to protect our company. Also, like let's say that your country is starting an industry that's kind of a newborn industry, and you want to give them a fighting chance. So you could put a tariff to protect that industry for a few years until they kind of get their feet under them. But eventually, you want to make these things temporary until that issue is resolved. So that is not the case for these tariffs. It's unclear what the goals of these tariffs are. If the idea is to onshore manufacturing to the United States, which that needs to happen to some degree. Like we can't be fully, like, we found out during COVID that like we don't even produce any like personal protective equipment. We don't have enough drugs. Like we need to be some self-sufficient in many of those things. And that makes sense. But if you wanted to onshore production, you'd want to give people time to build up the production capacity at home. So you could say, hey, we're going to start putting tariffs on these specific industries that we think are important to our national security or to our economy. And we're going to increase the tariffs in the future by X amount and give people a few years to figure out new supply chains and things like this. But doing this thing like immediately. And then also like all these talk about tariffs recently, people are like, America's been like, we're going to put a tariff on you. Okay, well, now we're not. It's going to be this percent. Okay, now it's going to be lowered. Who knows? Like these percentages might totally change by tomorrow. it's all over the place. All right. So, anyways, I have that's how this has been working. A couple of funny things about this, just is that if you look through here, you will not see Russia or Belarus on this list. We're not putting any tariffs on them. And the White House was asked why, and they said, you know, of the 180 countries, including U.S. allies, that are now being hit with retaliatory tariffs, Russia is not on the list. Neither is Belarus. Neither is Korea and Cuba. And they said Russia is not on the list because sanctions from Ukraine have already rendered trade between the two countries at zero. Now, that's not true. Last year, we have $3.5 billion in trade between us and Russia. That is not small, but not insignificant. And we also, like, if you look on this list, like Iran is on this list, and we have massive sanctions against Iran too, but they also made on this. Anyway, that's funny. And the other thing that was funny is, I just saw this in the news when I was researching for this video, is that they have a couple of things like this British Island Ocean Territory is like basically a small island. The only people on this island is a U.S. naval base. So we're basically taxing our own military base, I guess. I mean, it doesn't matter because there's absolutely no trade between this and us. But it's just like some White House intern ran this formula with a spreadsheet and put on here a bunch of places and countries that we don't do any trade with whatsoever, and don't, but we're putting a 10% thing on it. This also, Heard and McDonald Islands are these islands in the near the Antarctic, and there's no human population on these islands. There's just penguins on there and some seals, a couple other shorebirds maybe, and some fish and stuff. But there's no trade with them. But we're gonna hit them with a 10% retaliatory tariff. Anyway, that's just funny. But I was gonna talk about what I personally think about tariffs. But I found these videos that say it much better than I could, and so I'm gonna play them for you guys.
Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery. You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while.
Okay, this is the important part. Maybe I should have just started here. But anyway, he's talking about the Smoot-Hawley Act right here. And so this was an across-the-board tariff. So this is the last time tariffs were this high. It reduced imports and exports by almost 70% during the Depression. But anyway, Reagan says it very well here.
Protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity. Now, it hasn't always been easy. There are those in the Congress, just as there were back in the 30s, who want to go for the quick political advantage, who risk America's prosperity for the sake of a short-term appeal to some special interest group, who forget that more than 5 million American jobs are directly tied to the foreign export business and additional millions are tied to imports. Well, I've
All right. And then this is Thomas Sowell. He's a pretty popular economist in conservative circles. He was talking about this was from like 8 years ago when Trump was putting tariffs on steel.
All right, they call Thomas Sowell the conscience of the conservative movement today, and what he sees the president doing on potential trade war talk, well, it's unconscionable. Take a look. The president, as you know, is trying to extract concessions from those who he says have been dumping steel and aluminum on our shores. And they're responding in kind now, threatening a tit-for-tat action that could go global. Now, I know you have called these not so much tariffs, but trade-offs back and forth. Do you worry that this thing goes out of control?
Oh, absolutely. I happen to believe that the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930 had a lot more to do with the Great Depression than the stock market. Unemployment was nowhere near as low the first year after the stock market as it was in the first 5 months after those tariffs went in. And it's like many kinds of wars. It's very easy to start those kinds of wars. It is very hard to stop them because they grow completely out of control. The idea that we have to have a budget surplus that's better than a deficit is completely contrary to what all the evidence shows. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, we had trade surpluses. It didn't do us a bit of good. During the prosperity of the 1990s, we had trade deficits that didn't hurt the prosperity at all. This is a number that there's less to it than meets the eye.
All right, well, that would be news to the president who's made it a cause celeb. Do you think it's a mistake that he focuses so much on the countries with whom we have a trade deficit or industries that are? Go ahead.
Conceivably, a catastrophic mistake depends on how far he wants to push it in defiance of what more experienced people around him may be telling him.
You know, the reason why I kept echoing that theme with you, I've been reading a lot of the European press, the English versions that I get, and a lot of them have been saying, almost to a publication, the president is unleashing something he might regret. You seem to agree.
You can't control it. You start it and you can't stop it, and that's the bad part. If this is something he could put in, and after a month or two he sees it's not working, he'd stop it. No, by that time it's acquired a life of its own. Other countries will already be taking their retaliatory measures, and the net result is that all the countries put together are going to lose because they'll cut down the total volume of international trade as they did in the 1930s.
All right. Yeah. So basically, those are kind of my thoughts. I kind of agree with what Reagan and Sowell said about this. And this is already happening. So, basically this is a great opportunity for China because like America's been the economic superpower of the world, but China is kind of rising as our definitely our economic and possibly our military rival. And this is kind of like ceding leadership economically to China because now that we've put tariffs on everyone's going to be like, well, you know what? We need to find trading partners that aren't going to put tariffs on us, and maybe we'll cozy up with China, which is the second greatest economic power in the world right now. And so it gives China a huge opportunity to basically change the shape of world trade to favor them and cut us out of it. And this is already it's happening already. Like this is dated March 30th, 2025, Japan, Korea, and South Korea vowed to strengthen trade ties amid looming U.S. tariffs. So by this time, the tariffs have not been declared, but there was a lot of talk of it. They knew it was coming down the pipeline. And if you guys know anything about Far East history, you know that the relationship between Japan, China, and South Korea is not good. They have a lot of bad history between the three of them, and it takes a lot to try to get them to cooperate with each other. And this is making them cooperate with each other. And this is probably across the world, trade patterns are going to basically reconfigure so that we get cut out of it. And it's just, overall, it's not going to be a good thing. And the other thing is we still have tariffs from like the World War II era that are still in effect right now. There's this thing called the chicken tax, which was imposed in 1964 by Lyndon Johnson. So the story behind this is actually kind of funny. What happened is after World War II, we U.S. farmers got really good at raising chickens. Chickens used to be kind of a luxury food, and they were expensive. But by 1960s, we had figured out refrigerated transport and how to freeze chickens, and we were basically sending all these frozen chickens to Europe. And our chickens were so cheap, and not because we were subsidizing it or we were doing unfair practices or anything like that. It's just that we had figured out how to do chicken farming faster and better in the United States, and it was way cheaper for us to do it. And so we could sell it for much cheaper. We were undercutting European farmers. The European farmers, they got mad and they told their governments, "Hey, you have to protect us from these cheap U.S. chickens." So they put a tariff on U.S. chickens. And so in retaliation, we put a tariff on their light trucks because back then Germany was sending a lot of light trucks to us. And this light truck tariff called the chicken tax, which is a 25% tariff, is a pretty high tariff on light trucks, still remains to this day. We still have this chicken tax. So almost 50 years later, we still have this tax from a kind of a minor trade war that happened in the 1960s. So anyways, now you guys know my feelings about tariffs. It's kind of a funny thing because for the longest time, free trade and no tariffs was kind of a conservative position, and Democrats or progressives or liberals, they were had strong ties to labor unions and stuff and wanted to protect these manufacturing jobs, so they wanted tariffs on it. So, in the 80s when Reagan was president, the Democrats wanted to impose tariffs and increase tariffs, and the Republicans were like, well, that's silliness. And but economic theory just says that free trade is better overall. I mean, and there are times when you should use tariffs and you should use them judiciously and surgically. But yeah, I kind of funny that it's the whole thing has flipped around and it's completely opposite now. Just an interesting thing about U.S. politics, I guess. All right, well, the bottom line is these tariffs are going to hurt Aptera, but the other part of it is it's going to hurt everyone else, probably more or to the same or to various degrees. I mean, some are going to be hurt a little bit less than Aptera. Some are going to be hurt about the same as Aptera. Some of them are going to be hurt more than Aptera, but it's going to hurt everyone. The pain is going to be across the board. So is this a good thing for Aptera? No, I don't think so. Overall, it's not as bad as we think because, again, it hurts everyone. But then maybe the whole country going and the whole world going into a recession is just not good for any kind of thing. All right. Well, I know this is going to be, because this issue is so political now, it's a little bit of a hot button issue. And when things get political, people have a hard time seeing things objectively. I always like to think of it as, if the other side was doing it, would I feel differently about it? Because I think these policy things, you should be able to look at them objectively and figure out how they work and see if, would you be happy if the other side was doing this exact same policy move? And me personally, I don't care who's doing this policy move. Across the board tariffs like this, I think are a terrible idea, and it's not going to be good. And I'm a little afraid that it's going to be this. It's going to be a thing like Thomas Stowell says that you can't rein back. Like once you push this thing down the hill, you're going to have a really hard time reining this thing back. It's just going to keep rolling down the hill and gaining momentum, and you won't be able to stop the cart. Hopefully that I'm wrong, and we'll see how it goes. But thanks for watching, guys.